Hello. Um, Today I had a little walk, and I paid a visit to one shop, the shop closest to where I live, shop that I go to most often, and they actually had a few. Like say if a 10 out of 10 CD is something that I wanted forever, and I'd even pay full price for it if I came across it, and we go down to, a 0 out of 10 means I have no interest. Generally, I don't buy anything on a 1 out of 10, 1 to 5 out of 10, because those are the things where, it has no interest on a kind of sliding scale upwards. Then there's kind of things around a 5 out of 10, which I certainly have some 5 out of 10s, things that I'm kind of like, maybe that could be okay, or that might be interesting. And the thing with 5 out of 10s is that, they're very hit or miss. And then you go up to 6, 7, 8, 9. How would I class these? I guess these would be maybe a 6 out of 10. Actually, depends, because I haven't listened. I just saw a few of the bands. I didn't look at the track listing properly. These, because there's two of them. These are two compilations of the MTV show 120 Minutes. Now, in New Zealand, we never really had MTV. We had it for a very short period in the late 90s. I think it would have been about 1997 through the first half of 1998. So about 18 months. And we had the English version of MTV, so we didn't get the American version. There were some okay things on that. As a teenager, as I was at that time, I remember that there was a couple of good shows. Most of it was just dross, but they would have a late night metal show, I remember, with this highly attractive blonde European lady introducing the videos. And but anyway, we never had the American version, which had 120 minutes. 120 minutes I've heard of a lot over the years. I've heard referred to by artists and musicians. I've heard it in magazines and in books and talking about bands. It is it was, because it doesn't exist anymore, was the alternative rock show, or alternative music in general show. And it ran from 1986. In its first run, I think 1986 through to about 2005 or 2004. And as you may or may not know, or you probably do know if you're American, that MTV kind of doesn't really play music anymore. But it was reincarnated on MTV2 for a short run in the late 2000s, maybe early 2010s. But I guess, its time had passed. But just looking at these quickly, so this is Never Mind the Mainstream 1 and 2. Now you can see these originally came from Real Groovy Records. Now it seems almost every video I talk about, I'm bringing up the shop Real Groovy, because it's quite funny how the conveyor belt of used music kind of goes. Is that you find a lot of stuff in the secondhand shops that is already secondhand from Real Groovy, because Real Groovy very clearly marks their stock. This was the older stickers. This would have been about. They still use these stickers, but for secondhand stuff now, they more typically use the price codes, which I've showed before, which is just like a red A or a blue D. But now this was the actual barcode. They still use this style, but they're not as common. But I would guess this was older. So that means, because I found this in a Salvation Army shop for $1, and so they're already secondhand. So that means they are at least third hand. These have been owned by at least 3 people before they've come to me. No, is that right? Someone bought them new, gave them to Real Groovy. Okay, no, sorry. I'm the third buyer, aren't I? Possibly. There could be buyers in between. Who knows? Jeez. But these are from 1991, I think I saw on the back of them. Yes, 1991 and 1991. Put out by Rhino, which is a Warner Brothers subsidiary. The interesting... sorry, I just turned my neck and it hurt. The interesting thing about these, and about that year, 1991, is that when I first saw these 120 minutes, and I saw 19, you kind of imagine, well, 1991, that's kind of really the year that grunge and that kind of alternative rock really kickstarts. That's when Nevermind and Gish and Bad Motorfinger and I think Dirt come out all in that same year. But this seems to be the very end of the older kind of alternative before the, I guess let's call it the Seattle explosion, or whatever cliche you want to use. Because if you look at these artists, they're more what I associate with more late 80s alternative. So let's look through these. So first one here, you can see they've got an out of print sticker. Not really surprised. Why would it still be in print? There's the disc. Dave Kendall. Now, Dave Kendall was the host. Now, I don't know who Dave Kendall is. I know who he is. I know he's the host, but if I saw a picture of him, I wouldn't be able to identify him. I do know the other host from the late 90s, Matt Pinfield. And the reason why I know him is that he was mentioned in a few different things I've read over the years, and he was also on one of Limp Bizkit's albums. I think it was the Chocolate Starfish album. He was kind of like a special guest, and there's like this thing where his spoken word thing by him, not spoken word, but he's speaking on one of the tracks, I remember. And so I found out he was the host of 120 minutes in that period. I think it was like 96 through to 2002-ish. So it's just got the track listing, which I'll talk about in a second, and then a little bit of explanation and introduction talking about each of the songs, which is interesting. And then order your 120 minutes man t-shirt now. That's crazy. Only $9.95. Geez, you know what? As a kind of an aside, is t-shirts. Because a lot of bands, as you know, you see kids nowadays. It's kind of like the ongoing joke is that kids walk around nowadays. And when I say kids, teenagers, wearing band t-shirts of bands they have no idea who they are. Half the time they even know they're a band, which is I don't know. I don't really give a shit. Doesn't. Sometimes I say, you get excited. I'll see a t-shirt and I'll think for a split second, whoa, that person likes that band. And then you realize it's some 14-year-old, and you think they probably don't know who that band is. A lot of the bands sold the rights for their images or kind of logos to kind of very I guess like in America, the Walmart kind of level, like in New Zealand, it's called the warehouse. You see like Nirvana and Metallica shirts in the warehouse now for like pretty cheap prices. But if you go to a show and buy actual band merchandise, like a t-shirt at a show, they're really expensive, like 50 or 60 New Zealand dollars, which is about, I guess, like $30 American, which I don't know if that sounds expensive where you are, but for me, $50 or $60 for a t-shirt is expensive. The most recent examples I can think of, what was a while ago in 2018, I went and saw Nine Inch Nails. This was in South Korea. They toured there, and I wanted to buy a Nine Inch Nails t-shirt, and it was like 65,000 won or something, which is even more, about 35, 40 American dollars. And then when I saw Mr. Bungle earlier this year, I looked at their t-shirts, and to be honest, there was actually no t-shirt design that I really liked the look of. But I remember their prices were really expensive as well. So seeing a band, not a band t-shirt, a t-shirt for $9.95 of a kind of official merchandise is kind of funny. Anyway, what is on this album? You might have seen some of this. So we have Higher Ground by the Chili Peppers, which is the Stevie Wonder cover. Soul Asylum, Stone Roses, Mission UK, Bob Mould from Husker Du, The Church, Under the Milky Way, Cocteau Twins, Julian Cope, Sinead O'Connor, Sonic Youth, cool thing. Robin Hitchcock and the Egyptians. World Party, XTC, They Might Be Giants, Campervan, Beethoven, and Modern English. Now, a lot of those, not a lot, some of those bands I don't even know. For example, Campervan, Beethoven, I've heard that name before, but I don't think I've ever heard any of their music knowingly. Same with Modern English. Same with World Party. The rest of them I've heard of before. I've heard some of their music. Maybe it's only a couple of songs, but some of them I know. Obviously, Chili Peppers, Stone Roses, Sonic Youth I know very well. I know XTC pretty well. I know Sinead O'Connor reasonably well. The others I've heard, I get a few songs here and there from Soul Asylum. I reviewed some of their CDs on this channel before. But what you see there is that there's a lot of kind of English stuff or non-American. So the Stone Roses, I think the Church are Australian, aren't they? Julian Cope, he's English from Liverpool. Sinead O'Connor's Irish, obviously. XTC are English. Cocteau Twins are English. So yeah, that's, I don't know what you think, but when I look at these kind of seem very late 80s alternative to me. They seem, or they're certainly pre the whole grunge thing. There's nothing there that you would even class as grunge. When you think about, well, I guess Sonic Youth were kind of seen as kind of godfather figures of the alternative music scene in the 90s, as they'd kind of come before. And I guess the Chili Peppers were kind of their own thing. They were kind of separate from, even though Blood Sugar Sex Magic kind of gets lumped in with those 1981 albums, they were always kind of their own thing because they had that more funk element, obviously. But yeah, none of those other bands you'd even really in any way associate with 90s alternative, really, would you? Other than Sonic Youth. Maybe Bob Mould a little bit. I think people, again, kind of as in that Godfather role, but not really making anything of note in the 90s. And then we had the second one. Interesting, this was $9.95 when they bought it, and this was $7.95. Why was this $2 cheaper? This is Compilation 2, put out in the same year. I don't know if they were released at the same time. Dave Kendall gives the little liner notes appraisal. And then what do we have on this one? We have REM, of course, Public Image Limited, Pill, The Ramones, X, Ministry, Morrissey, The Jesus and Mary Chain, Echo and Bunnymen, Joy Division, New Order, Depeche Mode, The Sugar Cubes, Husker Du, Faith No More, Violent Femmes, and Wire. Very much the same kind of stuff, isn't it? A lot of British English stuff. So we got Pill, Morrissey, obviously they're both English. Jesus and Mary Chain are Scottish, Echo and Bunnymen are English, Joy Division obviously English, New Order English, Depeche Mode English, Sugar Cubes, that was Bjork's original band. I think they were mostly English, obviously she's Icelandic. Wire, I think, are English as well. And a lot of that late 80s, mid-late 80s, and even early 80s in the case of Joy Division, alternative post-punk type stuff was English, wasn't it? You know, there's the well-known kind of tale of Nirvana's rise to fame, and that they really found fame in England before they had any sort of success in the US. They toured in England. They did the European tour with Tad, pre Nevermind, and that's the case for a lot of those bands, that they kind of find more fame in Europe and England especially because that kind of music had more of a foothold in those countries. If you look at the English charts, the British charts through the 80s, the late 70s and the 80s, of course there's majority is just pop music, pop shit like Bros and whatever else was around in the 80s, But there was also a lot of surprising stuff pops up on those charts, like New Order and Joy Division and the Smiths and things that kind of, they got to quite high chart positions, much higher than anything of similar caliber or similar style would have ever got on the Billboard charts in the US. So maybe the fact that there's so much English music on these compilations is kind of speaks to that 80s alternative was as much an English thing, or British. I keep saying English, that's not fair. British, because there's Irish and Scottish and Welsh bands as much as there are English. It was much as a British UK. Oh, I shouldn't. I just put my foot in my mouth. I just said Irish in terms of British. Let's say the British Isles. My dad's Irish, so I'm not trying to say that Ireland should be lumped in together with the UK. But you get my point. Some other interesting ones. We see Faith No More. Obviously, this is pre Mike Patton. 1991, he was in the band. He'd been in the band since, I think, 88. 89, he joined with the Real Thing. But We Care a Lot is when Chuck Mosley was still in the band. Love Will Tear Us Apart. Obviously, Ian Curtis had been dead with 11 years by this time, 1991. Stigmata by Ministry. I really like that song. It's one of my favorite Ministry songs. Apparently, Al Jorgensen hates that song. What I was listening to an interview with him. You know when an artist who you like and you like something that, well, not that I'm the hugest Ministry fan, but I like that song. And if the artist said, "Oh, I don't like that song," it kind of disappoints you a little bit, or does me at least. And then of course REM, which are kind of seen as, again, I talked about that Godfather position when we talk about grunge. These bands that weren't necessarily grunge, and I don't like to use that word grunge because that's not really, it's kind of meaningless really when you see the bands lumped in. But the predecessors of grunge, we hear bands like Sonic Youth and REM kind of referred to a lot. Even though I never really saw the REM element in those bands in the 90s. You know, Kurt Cobain talked about REM, how he liked REM, and he wanted to get his have a album produced by Scott Litt, who was famous for doing all the REM albums, and I think him and Michael Stipe I think that is. I've seen an interview with Michael Stipe. I don't know if they had met each other, or they kind of were in contact with each other by writing letters to each other. And Michael Stipe said they were actually planning to record together at the time that Kurt killed himself. So, they REM are kind of seen as, you know, I guess the fact they kind of did a lot of independent work in the 80s, didn't they? They kind of laid down a template for a band to kind of go out and get fame independently through college radio before signing with a big label. So maybe that's why they're kind of revered. But you certainly don't hear a lot of REM when you listen to Alice in Chains or Mudhoney or Soundgarden or even Nirvana, to be honest. But yeah, certainly they are considered to be important in that sense. So yeah, interesting as a kind of, I guess, a time capsule of that, the beat before grunge really took off in that same year in 1991. I'm sure if there was a 120 minutes compilation in 1992, it would be a very different track listing, wouldn't it? It would probably be bands like Nirvana and Soundgarden and the Smashing Pumpkins and Alice in Chains and so on and so forth. But they said that grunge really kind of damaged British alternative music because it found such popularity in the UK and Europe. There was kind of a period there in the kind of, I guess, first half of the 90s where British music wasn't doing as much. But then, I guess, Britpop, when did Definitely Maybe come? I guess that was 94, wasn't it? And Blur had obviously been releasing things through the early 90s, but didn't really find huge fame until about the same time with Oasis in the mid-90s. But kind of in that period, 91 through 94, there wasn't a lot coming out of Britain in the same way it had maybe beforehand. So yeah, always nice to find something. And I think and apart from just that, what I kind of didn't really say, I think it's a good collection of music. I don't know every song, but the songs that I do know, I actually like a lot. Orange Crush, I love that song. This Is Not a Love Song, I love that song. Do you remember Rock and Roll Radio? To be honest, not my favorite Ramones song at all. Burning House of Love, can't think of that song off the top of my head, but I've listened to X. I talked about Stigmata. The Killing Moon, it's probably Echo and Bunnyman's most famous song because it was used in Donnie Darko, which also, interestingly, on this other one, Under the Milky Way by The Church, was also used in the Donnie Darko soundtrack. So they were trying to capture it, weren't they? Because that Donnie Darko movie was, I can't remember, what was the date? That was a pivotal part of the movie, wasn't the date? But it was sometime in the late 80s, wasn't it? Because they used Tears for Fears, two Tears for Fears songs. They used Head Over Heels and Mad World, which of course was the cover by Gary Jules, who kind of completely redid it. I said The Church. I said Killing Moon, which is kind of the first song in the movie. What other songs were there? There's a couple other 80s songs in it as well. But it was that late 80s alternative stuff. Similar vein to what we have here. Anyway, we'll leave it there. Thank you for watching.